There's a kind of horror that doesn't need blood, doesn't need shadows, doesn't need a monster hiding under the bed. There's a horror that lives inside the skull itself, quiet, polite, smiling. And that's the Horror Click. The 2006 Adam Sandler comedy has been hiding under every joke, every pratfall, every easy laugh we gave, without ever realizing what we were actually watching. Because I need to tell you something right now in the first few seconds of this video. Click is not a comedy. Click is the documentary footage of a human mind being erased. It's the almost clinical filming of a man being eaten alive from the inside while the world around him keeps laughing. There is no magic universal remote. There is no time travel. What exists is a terminal patient, and we, the audience, were invited, without ever knowing it, into the inside of his head to watch, in first person, the final collapse of his consciousness. And I promise you, by the end of this script, you will never be able to watch this movie the same way again. Let's take this slow, because this kind of pain deserves to be told carefully. I want you to forget for a moment everything they sold you about this film. Forget the colorful poster, forget the upbeat soundtrack, forget the promise of a comedy the whole family can enjoy, because underneath that cheerful packaging is one of the most accurate, most brutal, most honest portraits Hollywood has ever produced about what it means to lose your own mind while your body insists on staying upright. And the perverse genius of this script is that it makes us laugh for almost 2 hours at the agony of a man being erased layer by layer without him ever realizing the scale of the tragedy he's living. We laughed because we weren't prepared to see it, but today, together, we're going to see it. Michael Newman is an architect, a tired man, overworked, a father who keeps promising to play with his kids tomorrow, always tomorrow, because today he needs to finish one more project, one more meeting, one more crumb of ambition he believes will someday turn into security for his family. And it's in this state of exhaustion, of a weak body and an even more fragile mind, that he walks into a Bed Bath & Beyond at 3 a.m, looking for a universal remote. Only this particular store has a section nobody else can seem to see. And it's there, among shelves that feel like they don't belong to this dimension of reality, that he meets Morty. I need you to pay attention to this name, Morty, because the writers, consciously or not, planted a clue here that most people never bothered to decode. Morty comes from mortem, the Latin word for death. And it's no coincidence that this man, white-haired, ashen-skinned, moving with a strangely slow gait, with eyes carrying a weariness that doesn't belong to this world, shows up right when Michael's body starts to fail. He didn't sell him a remote control. He handed him a diagnosis. Think about it with me. How many times in real life does a person receive news of a terminal illness in the most mundane, almost bureaucratic way? A doctor hands over a test result in a cold examination room under a buzzing fluorescent light, and the patient's entire life splits in two. Right there, in that instant, with no thunder, no storm, just the silence of a diagnosis being read out loud. Morty's store is that examination room. The remote control is the medical chart, and from the moment of that handshake, death becomes Michael's constant companion. She's going to be there the whole time, smiling, explaining the rules, while his body falls apart. And here's the most unsettling part of this entire analysis. Morty never charges Michael a dime for the remote. He says it's free because death never bills you up front. It only comes in the end to collect everything at once. There's another detail, small and almost invisible, that confirms all of this. Look at the lighting the first time Morty appears inside the store. It changes. The ambient sound of the world muffles, like someone slid thick glass between Michael and reality. In film language, that's a very specific visual technique, historically used to represent the exact moment a character receives news that will change their life forever. It's the same technique used in countless medical dramas, the instant a protagonist hears, for the first time, a word they're going to carry for the rest of their life. Cancer, tumor, irreversible. The movie never says these words out loud because it can't, because it needs to stay dressed up as a comedy. But the language of cinema doesn't lie. And there's one more detail that has always unsettled me, ever since the first time I rewatched this film with these eyes. Morty's remote only works for Michael. Nobody else can see it. Nobody else can use it. Nobody else besides him even knows the object exists. Clinically, that has a very specific name in neurology. It's called a unilateral perceptual disturbance. This is exactly how hallucinations linked to brain tumors or early-stage dementia manifest themselves. The patient sees, feels, and interacts with something that only exists inside his own mind, while the world around him keeps living in a completely different reality with no idea whatsoever of what's happening inside that head. The remote control was never a physical object. The remote control was always the illness itself, manifesting inside Michael's consciousness as something tangible, something he could hold, press, control. Because that's how the human mind, desperate, tries to cope with what it cannot process. It turns the abstract into something concrete. It turns terror into an object, because an object, at least, feels controllable. A terminal illness does not. When Michael gets home and discovers the remote actually works, when he manages to freeze time to argue with the dog, fast forward through a boring fight with his wife, rewind to hear a joke again, we, the innocent audience, think we're watching a magical gadget being tested out, with humor, with lightness. But what we're actually watching is the onset of symptoms, the first lapses, the first moments where Michael's mind, under the weight of a disease the story never names, begins losing control over its own perception of time. I know this is hard to hear, but stay with me, because pain, once understood, stops being just suffering. It becomes compassion, and compassion, in the end, is the only thing that makes it bearable to look directly at suffering this size, without looking away, without hiding behind the easy comfort of pretending it's just fiction, just an exaggerated gag from an American studio comedy. From the first time Michael fast forwards through time without meaning to, the film enters its most terrifying phase. And that's exactly where most people laugh the hardest. Without realizing, they're laughing at the deterioration of a central nervous system. Let's talk about what a time jump really is inside this story. Because clinically, what Click is describing, scene after scene, is a sequence of neurological blackouts. Severe lapses of consciousness where the body keeps functioning, walking, talking, driving, but the memory simply stops recording. It's a real, well-documented, terrifying phenomenon that occurs in advanced stages of certain dementias, in tumors located in specific brain regions, in severe epilepsy with automatism, and also, more quietly and more devastatingly, in advanced early-onset Alzheimer's processes. The body keeps standing, but the person, the consciousness, the self that feels and remembers is already gone from inside it. Michael comes back to reality, and the family dog is visibly older. He's confused. He laughs it off. Wow, he grew up fast. But think about this with me. With all the seriousness this scene deserves, how much time needs to pass for a pet to visibly age without the owner noticing anything that happened in between? We're not talking about minutes, not weeks. We're talking about entire months, an entire stretch of life happening, with no witness, no memory, no consciousness present for any of it. The kind of gap that, in a real household, would leave behind a dozen unanswered questions nobody thought to ask until it was already too late. And the worst part isn't that. The worst part is why he doesn't notice, because his brain has stopped registering these gaps as losses. It's rewriting reality itself to make it feel continuous. In neurology, that has a name: confabulation. The sick brain fills memory gaps with false explanations just to preserve the illusion of psychic continuity. Michael thinks he just fast-forwarded through time, itty nut. But really, he's confabulating, desperately, so he doesn't lose his mind in the face of the size of the void the disease has opened up inside him. I need to tell you about the family dog, because this is one of the most inhumanly sad scenes in the entire Sony Pictures filmography. And nobody has ever cried over it the way they should have. The family dog, Sundance, dies. And Michael finds out almost by accident, in a fast forward, he didn't even know he'd taken. He never saw the dog get sick, never saw the dog suffer, never got the chance to say goodbye, because his illness, the illness Morty represents, stole exactly those moments, the small ones, the ones we think are ordinary, until we realize they were the only ones that ever truly mattered. That's how a long-duration neurological blackout works. It doesn't steal the big event. It steals the process. It steals the meanwhile. It steals the chance to grieve slowly, to say goodbye in pieces, to process, and instead, it hands over just the final result. Dry, without context, without comfort. And if you think that's already painful enough, wait until we get to his father. Michael's father, Ted, shows up in increasingly spaced out, increasingly tense scenes. A man trying to reconnect with his son before it's too late. And the movie treats it as dramatic comedy. That tired cliche of the absent father learns to value family. But if you look at it through the lens I'm offering you right now, you'll realize the real clock ticking here isn't the son's, it's Ted's own clock. Because when Michael wakes up from another blackout and finds out his father has died, with no warning, no goodbye, no simultaneous awareness of that loss, he isn't reacting to the death of a minor character in a family comedy. He's reacting to the most brutal confirmation possible, that his illness has already consumed enough time to steal from him even the right to his own grief. Because that's what an advanced neurodegenerative disease does. When it moves fast enough, it doesn't just kill the people around the patient. It kills, before that, the patient's own ability to be present for those deaths. Michael doesn't grieve his father's death at the right time. He grieves late, in fragments, incompletely, because his own mind could no longer keep pace with real life. And that's exactly why I said, at the very start, that Click is one of the scariest movies ever hidden inside a family comedy wrapper. Because the horror here isn't supernatural. It's biological, it's medical, it's the exact thing that anyone who's ever cared for a family member with advanced dementia recognizes scene after scene with their chest tightening. There's a quieter moment in the film, easy to miss on a first watch, that lands very differently once you know what you're actually looking at. It's a brief exchange at Thanksgiving, where an aunt jokes that Michael looks a million miles away at the table, and everyone laughs and moves on to carving the turkey. But a family member appearing physically present while being cognitively and emotionally absent, at a holiday gathering specifically, is one of the most commonly reported early warning signs caregivers describe when a loved one's neurological decline first becomes impossible to ignore. It's usually not a dramatic collapse that tips a family off. It's exactly this: a distant look at a dinner table, brushed off as stress, brushed off as he's just tired, until the pattern becomes too consistent to explain away as anything other than what it actually is. Now, I want you to think about his wife, Donna, because her divorce from Michael, inside this new reading, immediately stops being a punchline and instead becomes one of the most precise portraits imaginable of what the medical literature calls early psychosocial death. It's when a patient, still physically alive, begins losing the emotional bonds of their life because the illness makes them increasingly absent, increasingly strange, increasingly unrecognizable to the people who love them most. Donna doesn't leave Michael out of pettiness. She pulls away because, to her, the man she married is no longer fully present, even though his body is still sitting at the dinner table. Without knowing the clinical name for it, she's doing exactly what psychologists call anticipatory grief. The process of beginning to say goodbye to someone who's still breathing, but who is already, in some real sense, not fully there anymore. There's a scene between the two of them that, revisited through this lens, becomes almost unbearable to watch. It's the moment Donna confronts Michael, telling him he's always there but never present, that his body sits at the table, but his head is always somewhere else. And Michael, genuinely confused, unable to understand what she's talking about, tries to defend himself by insisting he's always been right there with her. And the two of them, in that moment, are describing two completely different realities, because one of them is living life normally, and the other is only living the fragments the illness allows him to keep. This kind of disconnect has a name in the caregiver literature. It's called shared reality dissonance. It's when two people living under the same roof, sharing the same bed, the same life, start living in practice on different timelines because one of them is losing entire chunks of their shared experience without even realizing it. Donna isn't fighting with a neglectful husband. Donna is screaming, desperate, at someone who can no longer fully hear her because part of his mind is no longer there to register what she's saying. Caregivers who have lived through something similar often describe this exact feeling, the strange loneliness of grieving someone who is still sitting right across the table from you, still breathing, still technically there, and yet somehow already halfway gone. And the divorce. When it finally happens, far from being the feel-good redemption arc the movie wants you to believe, is actually the documentation of an entire family learning to survive around a presence that still breathes, but is already, quietly, leaving. Donna doesn't rebuild her life because she stopped loving Michael, but because she understood, even before he did, that the man she married was, in some way, already saying goodbye, slowly, silently, without ever having chosen to. And the most cruel part of all of this is that Michael, the patient himself, doesn't grasp the size of the distance that has opened up either. Because for someone suffering progressive cognitive blackouts, time doesn't hurt in a straight line. It hurts in flashes, in sharp, spaced-out blows. One day, he's playing with his little boy. In the next blackout, that boy is already a teenager who barely recognizes his father. And every time that happens, something inside Michael dies a little more, because he's being forced to witness in fragments the entire life the illness ripped away from him without ever asking permission. If you've ever lost time with someone you loved, to work, to exhaustion, to any reason that felt urgent in the moment and insignificant later on, I think you now understand, deep in your stomach, why this analysis hurts the way it does. There's a scene buried in the middle of the film that I consider the most devastating in the entire narrative, and almost nobody has ever talked about it with the seriousness it deserves. It's the scene where Michael discovers he missed his own son's most important basketball game. He fast forwards through what he thinks is just one boring afternoon of work, and when he comes back, his son is already a teenager, has already played the game, already won it, already lived the entire moment without his father there to see it. And the boy, carrying a sadness no kid should have to carry, says he didn't even miss him because he'd already gotten used to doing things alone. Think about the size of that. Think about what it clinically means for a patient to lose not one event, but entire years of the most important relationship of his life. In grief psychology, that has a name too. It's called ambiguous loss. It's one of the hardest kinds of loss to process that exists, because the loved one is still physically present, but psychologically, emotionally, they're increasingly gone. And the cruelest part is that it's not just the patient who suffers from this. It's the entire family, forced to learn how to love someone who's there, but at the same time, no longer fully there. Michael's son grows up learning not to expect his dad around, learns to celebrate alone, learns to hold on to his own victories without looking for the proud gaze every kid deserves to receive. And that's not the selfish choice of a workaholic father. The way the surface-level plot wants to sell it to you, that's the most faithful portrait imaginable of what happens inside thousands of real families when a neurological illness slowly steals away the presence of someone whose body refuses to stop existing. And it's a grief that repeats itself quietly in waiting rooms, in hospital hallways, in living rooms where a chair is still occupied, but the gaze that used to fill that space isn't fully there anymore. Now let's get to the point where Michael's illness has advanced the furthest. The moment when the film, hiding behind slapstick comedy, starts shamelessly filming the clear physical symptoms of a severe neurological breakdown. His body suddenly balloons with no medical explanation offered within the plot. His hair turns white too fast. He starts walking heavier, slower, like every step costs a superhuman effort. All of that together is the most honest visual representation a mainstream studio comedy has ever dared put on screen of the physical decline caused by an advanced stage, terminal, degenerative disease. It's the kind of decline family members recognize instantly and painfully. Even if the film never says the word out loud, there's also a physiological detail that always sends a chill down my spine every time I rewatch this part of the film. Michael starts losing control over the remote itself. The device begins fast-forwarding on its own, without him pressing anything. And that, my friends, is exactly the clinical description of a seizure with automatism, or an advanced absence seizure episode. The diseased brain begins making decisions the patient himself can no longer control. He tries to hit pause on his own life, and he can't, because at this stage, the illness stops asking for permission. If you've ever sat with someone whose personality seemed to shift day by day, whose memory seemed to skip whole conversations, you already understand, without needing a medical degree, exactly how unsettling it is to watch a mind you know well start operating on a schedule that no longer belongs to the person you knew. There's another moment worth pausing on before we take a break. The scene where Michael finally gets made partner at his architecture firm, the biggest professional goal of his life, the very thing he sacrificed all that family time to achieve. And when he fast forwards to skip the boring negotiation process, he comes back to find out he's already been a partner for years, already signed the papers, already lived through the most important moment of his career, without remembering any of it, without feeling any of it, because the illness stole exactly the experience of the achievement itself, leaving behind only the hollow result, a word on a nameplate, a title with no emotional memory attached to it at all. And clinically, that has a deeply sad explanation. There's a huge difference in the neuroscience of memory between semantic memory, which is simply the factual record that something happened, and episodic memory, which is the lived, felt memory, full of emotion, sensory detail, personal meaning. Patients with certain types of progressive brain damage preserve semantic memory longer and lose episodic memory first. They know things happened, but they can no longer feel them as though they'd actually lived them. And there are few things more dehumanizing than that. Knowing you achieved everything you ever wanted and not being able to feel anything about it because the part of you capable of feeling was already gone before you got there. Michael becomes, tragically, a spectator of his own life. He watches, from the outside, the major milestones that should define his existence without ever being able to fully inhabit, body and soul, the present moment of those milestones. And maybe that's exactly what this film, terrified of scaring off its family-friendly audience, tried to hide behind so much physical comedy, so much slapstick, so many jokes about dog farts and midlife crises. Because the plain naked truth would have simply been too unbearable to sell as Saturday night entertainment. A studio could put a terminally ill man on screen for 2 hours, but it could never put his diagnosis in the trailer. And it's exactly here that I need to pause this analysis for a moment. Before we move into the most painful part of this journey, I just want to say thank you to everyone who keeps watching, sharing, and coming back to sit with these darker corners of the human mind. Breaking down the hidden grief buried inside family comedies isn't always an easy watch, and I'm grateful every single one of you chose to stay for it. And speaking of not forgetting, if you feel like time is slipping through your own fingers without you even noticing, don't let this reflection fade from your memory. Make sure your presence here counts by dropping a like and hit subscribe on Fractured Plot so we can keep unraveling the psychology hidden inside cinema together. And let me know in the comments which memory of your own life you would never let get erased. Now, take a breath, because we're heading into the final stretch. The climax of Click happens in the pouring rain, in the middle of the street, when Michael, now an elderly dying man, runs after his adult son to stop him from repeating the exact same mistakes he made. On the surface, it's a redemption scene, a life lesson. Don't let work steal your family away. But if you look at it through the medical filter we've built together up to this point, this scene turns into something completely different. This scene is terminal delirium. Terminal delirium is a real phenomenon, documented by palliative care physicians, that happens in the final hours or days of life for patients with advanced neurological illness. The brain, already severely compromised, produces one last burst of intense, almost hallucinatory lucidity, where memories, guilt, regrets, and unfulfilled desires all blend into a single, vivid, urgent, almost theatrical scene. It's the brain trying, with the last sparks of energy it has left, to resolve everything an entire lifetime never let it resolve. Hospice nurses who have sat at countless bedsides describe this moment as almost sacred. The body finally quiet enough to let something else, something clearer, come through one last time. Doctors who specialize in end-of-life care describe this phenomenon with an even more beautiful, even more painful term. They call it paradoxical lucidity. It's when, in the final hours of life, even patients profoundly impaired by advanced neurodegenerative disease, who could no longer recognize faces, who could no longer form complete sentences, suddenly return for minutes, sometimes even hours, to speaking with startling clarity, recognizing loved ones, expressing wishes and goodbyes with a coherence that felt impossible moments before. Nobody can fully explain it scientifically with total certainty. There are theories about final spikes of electrical brain activity, about last-minute neurochemical reorganization. But the truth is, it remains one of the most beautiful and most tragic mysteries in medicine. Michael, bleeding, feverish, likely already hospitalized in a terminal state within the real reality of the story, projects this rain-soaked scene as one last desperate attempt to repair what the illness never let him repair in real time. He isn't literally chasing his son down the street. He's chasing the time the illness stole from him. And that's exactly why the scene feels so physically exhausting, so painfully slow, so charged with urgency. Because deep down, on some level of consciousness, he knows this is the last chance to say what he was never able to say. And when he finally reaches his son and says those words about family, about priorities, about not repeating the same mistakes, he isn't teaching a lesson for the future. He's making peace with his own past, a past he barely remembers living, because of the blackouts, because of the illness, because of Morty, who never once left his side. And it's exactly in that moment that Michael dies. The film softens all of this for you with an, and what if it was all just a dream, a vision, a second chance ending? And I understand why they had to do that, because a mainstream family comedy audience wasn't ready to swallow the raw, naked truth that they had been watching the entire time. A man rotting away in a hospital bed while his mind reconstructed, in desperate fragments, the pieces of a life he never had the time to fully live. But I believe you, watching this far, are ready for that truth. Michael Newman didn't get a magical second chance. Michael Newman died alone, having lost, because of a cruel and silent illness, the most important moments of his entire existence. The dog he never saw grow old. The father he never got to properly mourn. The marriage that fell apart while he was absent, even when physically present. His own children's childhoods, which flashed in front of his eyes in fragments the illness never let him keep. And Morty, death itself, stayed by his side the entire time, not as a villain, not as a monster, but as a silent, patient, almost gentle witness to a process every one of us deep down, sooner or later, is going to have to walk through in some form. A companion nobody asks for, and yet one that never once looks away, never once flinches, never once abandons the person it was sent to accompany, no matter how hard that final stretch of road becomes. There's a small final detail, the subtlest of all, that I saved specifically for the end of this analysis. When Michael, already in bed, surrounded by his family, finally destroys the remote control, throwing it away, screaming that he doesn't want to be on autopilot through his own life anymore. That gesture, in our reading, isn't an act of rebellion against technology. It's the last conscious act of will from a man trying, with whatever strength his sick mind still has left, to refuse the illness itself. It's the desperate attempt to reclaim control over a consciousness that no longer fully belongs to him. And that's exactly why this scene, even dressed up as comedy, has always pulled tears out of so many people, without anyone quite understanding why. Maybe the real horror of Click was never the remote control at all. Maybe the real horror is realizing that a lot of us are already living slower, quieter versions of this exact same story right now, fast-forwarding through entire days on autopilot, putting off important conversations, promising, "I'll deal with it tomorrow," while the biological clock keeps running without asking permission, without waiting for anyone. And maybe that's exactly why this film, even buried under layers of slapstick comedy, keeps echoing in so many people's memories, more than 2 decades after it first came out. Because deep down, some part of us always knew we were watching something sadder than a comedy was supposed to be. Some part of us always felt the weight hidden behind every joke, every time jump, every nervous laugh trying to disguise the size of the tragedy that character was actually living through. And if you've made it all the way here, to these final words, I don't think you need any more explanation for why this movie, decades later, still hurts in a way nobody quite knows how to name. Because deep down, we always knew. We just needed someone willing to say it out loud. And maybe now, the next time this movie comes on during a quiet Sunday rerun, you won't laugh in quite the same places you used to. If this hit you the way it hit me, drop a like and make sure you're subscribed so you never lose sight of what actually matters.